An American pastor burned a stack of Qurans and insulted the Muslim community. The pastor then challenged anyone to a debate with the condition that the loser must convert to the winner's religion. This challenge was accepted by a young Muslim man. The debate unfolded as a fierce battle of arguments and logic, testing the beliefs and reasoning of both parties. Follow this story until the end, and may those who subscribe be blessed with abundant prosperity in their lives. The auditorium was filled with an unsettling silence, a hush that carried the weight of anticipation and tension. In the heart of New York City, where diversity thrived but divisions sometimes simmered beneath the surface, a controversial event was about to unfold. Pastor John, known for his outspoken views on religion, stood at the center stage under the psyche glare of spotlights. His voice boomed through the hall as he began his speech, his tone sharp and unyielding. Religion, he declared, is not just about faith, it's about truth. And today, I challenge anyone here who believes in Islam to prove its validity. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging uneasy glances, while others leaned forward with curiosity. But Pastor John wasn't done yet. With dramatic flair, he produced a copy of the Quran from behind the podium. As gasps rippled through the crowd, he held it high above his head before dramatically tossing it into a small fire pit set up on stage. Flames licked hungrily at the sacred text, filling the air with smoke and an acrid smell. For many Muslims present, this act felt like a personal attack, a desecration of something they held most dear. Whispers erupted across the room, some voices trembling with anger, others with sadness. "Why do you burn our holy book?" one man shouted from the back, his voice cracking with emotion. But Pastor John merely smirked, unfazed by the outrage. "Because actions speak louder than words," he retorted coldly. "If your religion is true, then it should withstand scrutiny, not crumble when challenged." His arrogance stung deeply, leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of those watching. Yet amidst the chaos, a young man named Ahmad remained seated quietly, his face calm, but his eyes burning with resolve. He knew what was coming next, the pastor's challenge to debate the very essence of Islam. And though fear crept into his chest, so too did determination, to stand up not only for himself, but for every Muslim whose faith had been disrespected. Tonight. With flames still crackling softly in the background, Pastor John turned toward the audience, scanning faces until his gaze landed on Ahmad. Pointing directly at him, he said, "You." "Yes, you there. What's your name?" Ahmad hesitated briefly before standing up, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Ahmad," he replied simply. A murmur swept through the crowd as Pastor John nodded approvingly, almost gleefully. "Ahmad," he repeated, savoring the foreign syllables. "I have 3 questions for you. If you can answer them satisfactorily, I will concede defeat. But if you fail—" He let the threat hang in the air, thick with arrogance. His first question came swiftly, delivered with theatrical flair. "Why do Muslims go on Hajj to worship the Kaaba? Isn't it just a black stone? Doesn't that make it idolatry?" The room fell silent again, the weight of the accusation hanging heavy over everyone. Some Muslims clenched their fists tightly, while others whispered prayers under their breath. Pastor John continued, undeterred. "And my second question," he pressed, leaning closer to emphasize his point. "What proof do you have that your God exists? Can you show him to me right now? Bring him down from heaven if you dare." Laughter echoed faintly among parts of the audience, though it quickly died down as people realized the gravity of the moment. Finally, his third and perhaps most inflammatory question followed. "Why are there Muslims who become terrorists? Is it because your religion teaches hatred or violence?" At these words, several people gasped audibly, and angry murmurs rose once more. For Ahmad, however, each question struck a chord deep within him, not because they were unanswerable, but because they reflected deep misunderstandings perpetuated by fear and ignorance. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to respond, knowing that his answers would carry far more significance than mere words. They would be a bridge between worlds divided by prejudice. Ahmad stepped forward confidently, meeting Pastor John's challenging stare with quiet assurance. "Let me address your questions, one by one," he began, his voice firm yet respectful. To the first question about the Hajj, he explained patiently, "We don't worship the Kaaba. We use it as a focal point for our prayers. It symbolizes unity and submission to God alone. The Kaaba itself is nothing more than a structure built by Abraham and Ishmael, two prophets revered in both Christianity and Islam. We gather there not to worship stones, but to remember the covenant made with God." Pastor John frowned slightly, clearly expecting resistance rather than clarity. But Ahmad wasn't finished. Moving to the second question, he spoke with conviction. "As for proof of God's existence, consider the universe around us. The intricate design of nature, the laws governing physics, all point to a creator. In the Quran, Surah Ar-Ra'd verse 16 says, 'Do they not look at the earth, how it has been spread out?' This invites reflection on the world's creation. Science may explain how things work, but it cannot tell us why they exist. That's where faith comes in." Finally, addressing the sensitive topic of terrorism, Ahmad's voice softened, but carried no less intensity. "Terrorism is a distortion of any religion, including Islam. Our faith teaches peace, mercy, and justice. The Prophet Muhammad himself forbade killing innocent civilians during war. Those who commit acts of terror in the name of Islam do so out of extremism, not genuine belief. They twist scriptures to justify their actions, much like some groups in other religions have done throughout history." As Ahmad concluded, the auditorium seemed to exhale collectively. Many listeners nodded thoughtfully, touched by his eloquence and wisdom. Even Pastor John appeared momentarily stunned, his usual bravado faltering slightly. For the first time, since the debate began, the scales tipped, not toward victory, but toward understanding. Seizing the momentum, Ahmad decided to turn the tables. Leaning slightly forward, he locked eyes with Pastor John and asked calmly, "Now I have 3 questions for you. First, why did Jesus die on the cross? Who crucified him?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Pastor John hesitated, searching for the right words. "It was the Romans," he finally answered, though his tone lacked confidence. "They executed him because they saw him as a threat." Unfazed, Ahmad pressed on. "My second question is this: did Jesus ever explicitly claim to be God?" Silence fell over the room as Pastor John struggled to respond. After several long seconds, he admitted, "Well, the Bible doesn't directly quote him saying those exact words." Murmurs rippled through the audience, some nodding in agreement, others looking surprised. Ahmad's final question cut straight to the core of Christian theology. Is Jesus God, or is he human? Pastor John opened his mouth to reply, but found himself tongue-tied. How could he reconcile the dual nature of Christ without contradicting himself? Frustration flickered across his face as he realized the depth of the challenge before him. For Ahmad, these questions weren't meant to belittle or humiliate. Instead, they served as invitations for Pastor John and the entire audience to think critically about their beliefs. By posing such queries, Ahmad hoped to foster dialogue rooted in mutual respect rather than division. As the debate unfolded, further, it became clear that both sides had much to learn, and perhaps even more to gain, from embracing each other's perspectives. Pastor John stood frozen at the podium, his confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of Ahmad's questions. The room was deathly silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of feet. His face flushed red as he struggled to formulate an answer, but every word that came to mind felt inadequate. It is complex, he stammered finally, clutching the edges of the podium as if it were a lifeline. The audience watched intently, some leaning forward in their seats with bated breath, others exchanging glances laced with sympathy or disbelief. Pastor John had always been known for his fiery rhetoric and unshakable certainty, yet here he was, stumbling over basic theological concepts. For many in the crowd, this moment was a revelation. They saw not just a man faltering under scrutiny, but a symbol of how fragile dogma could be when confronted with genuine curiosity and open-mindedness. Ahmad remained calm, his expression softening into one of understanding rather than triumph. "Complexity is natural," he said gently, sensing the pastor's discomfort. "Religion often grapples with mysteries that defy easy answers. But isn't it better to explore those mysteries together, rather than let them divide us?" His words struck a chord with the listeners, who began nodding slowly, their faces reflecting newfound respect for the young Muslim speaker. As Pastor John continued to search for answers, his voice grew quieter, almost apologetic. "I suppose I haven't thought about it in that way before," he admitted softly, more to himself than to anyone else. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had spent years projecting strength and authority. The tension in the room shifted subtly, replaced by a sense of shared humanity, a reminder that even those on opposite sides of a debate are still people, grappling with doubts and uncertainties. The auditorium erupted in whispers as Pastor John's struggle became increasingly apparent. Some attendees shook their heads in disappointment, unable to reconcile his earlier arrogance with the uncertainty now etched across his features. Others, however, found themselves moved by the scene unfolding before them. A middle-aged woman, in the front row, wiped tears from her eyes, whispering, "This is what real faith looks like," not shouting louder, but listening harder. Behind her, a group of college students exchanged wide-eyed glances, clearly impressed by Ahmad's poise and intellect. One of them leaned over to another and whispered, "He didn't attack him, he just asked questions. And look where it got him." Their observation resonated with many in the room, who realized that the most powerful arguments aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the ones that invite reflection instead of confrontation. Meanwhile, Pastor John's supporters sat, stiffly in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. A few muttered complaints under their breath, accusing Ahmad of being overly critical or manipulative. Yet even among these dissenters, there were signs of introspection. One elderly man clasped his hands tightly, staring at the floor as though processing something deeply personal. Another woman clenched her Bible in her lap, her knuckles white, but eventually relaxed her grip and sighed heavily. For all its intensity, the atmosphere wasn't entirely adversarial. In fact, pockets of agreement began to form throughout the Yahis audience. People started turning to each other, engaging in quiet conversations about what they'd witnessed. A Jewish man seated near the back turned to a Christian neighbor and said, "You know, I think we've all been guilty of oversimplifying things. Maybe it's time we stop pretending we have all the answers." His companion nodded solemnly, adding, "And maybe start asking better questions." After several long minutes of hesitation, Pastor John finally raised his head, meeting Ahmad's gaze squarely. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, but it carried a sincerity that silenced the murmurs around him. I can't answer your questions," he confessed, lowering his eyes once more. "Not because I don't believe, but because I realize now how much I still don't understand." The admission hung heavy in the air, eliciting gasps from some and murmurs of approval from others. Ahmad stepped closer, extending a hand in friendship. "That takes courage," he said warmly, shaking Pastor John's hand firmly. "Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting that God will guide us toward truth, even when we stumble along the way." His words brought audible sighs of relief from the audience, who seemed to relax collectively, sensing the shift from conflict to reconciliation. Pastor John looked genuinely touched, his shoulders sagging as though releasing a burden he hadn't realized he carried. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I needed to hear that." Around them, the audience erupted into applause, not out of celebration, but out of appreciation for the honesty and humility displayed by both men. For the first time, that evening, the room felt united, transcending religious labels and cultural differences. As they stood side by side at the podium, Pastor John and Ahmad exchanged a brief but meaningful glance. Both knew this wasn't the end of the conversation, but merely the beginning of a journey toward greater understanding. And perhaps, in that moment, they represented something larger than themselves, an example of how dialogue, even in its most challenging forms, can lead to growth and healing. When the applause finally subsided, Ahmad took the microphone again, his voice filled with emotion. "What we've seen tonight is a testament to the power of dialogue," he began, addressing the entire audience. "We live in a world divided by fear and misunderstanding, where differences too often become weapons instead of bridges. But tonight, we've shown that it doesn't have to be this way." His words resonated deeply, drawing nods and smiles from every corner of the auditorium. Turning to Pastor John, he added, "You challenged me to defend my faith, and I did so. Not because I wanted to prove you wrong, but because I believe in the importance of sharing our truths with each other. And in doing so, I learned something too, that no matter how different our paths may seem, we share a common goal, to seek meaning, purpose, and connection with the divine." Pastor John nodded, stepping up to the microphone next. "Ahmad has taught me a valuable lesson," he said humbly, his voice steady despite the emotions coursing through him. "I came here tonight thinking I had all the answers, but I left realizing how much I still need to learn. Faith isn't about winning arguments, it's about building relationships based on trust, respect, and love." His admission drew another round of applause, this time accompanied by cheers and standing ovations. As the event concluded, people lingered in the auditorium, reluctant to leave the space where such profound transformations had occurred. Strangers introduced themselves, exchanging stories and laughter, forming connections that might never have happened otherwise. For many, the night marked a turning point, not just in their views of Islam or Christianity, but in their approach to life itself. They left not only enlightened, but inspired, carrying with them a renewed commitment to bridge divides and celebrate diversity. In the days and weeks that followed, the impact of that evening rippled outward, sparking discussions in homes, classrooms, and places of worship across the country. And though challenges remained, the memory of that auditorium, where two men from different worlds dared to engage in honest dialogue, remained a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that even in our darkest moments, light can emerge when we choose to listen, learn, and grow together.